On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I mean, this is like the vision I had for my life one day. From the outside, I mean, I think, anybody who listens to this is going to be like, oh my God. And to be honest with you, the only person who could listen to this and not hear anything new would probably be my husband. I mean, I don't think anybody else knows all of this. Some people know pieces, but yeah, my life looks from the outside very, very different than it has in the past.
Amanda Pagliarini Howard is co-founder of the Society Guide, a membership-based program that connects nonprofit organizations to high net worth donors and their advisors. The Society Guide publishes The Giving Book, an annual catalog and dossier of nonprofit organization members. Previously, Amanda was editor of Society Charlotte magazine and In Focus magazine, and a freelance copywriter and editor. She has contributed dozens of articles and essays to publications, including The Washingtonian, Uptown Magazine, Charlotte Viewpoint, and The Charlotte Observer. In this episode, we focus on trauma that she has overcome. Amanda was sexually assaulted when she was 14 years old. She was committed to a psychiatric hospital and became suicidal. She was recruited into a cult-like group that took control of her life for 7 years. When she left the group, she lived a life very much on the edge, until finding her way to a new city where a process of healing began. Amanda shares a story that very few people know. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you.
There's so much to talk about. You've been public in articles that you've published about overcoming sexual assault. You've written extensively in a memoir about being suicidal, and then part of a cult-like group that isolated you from society for nearly 7 years. Of being adopted and the evolution of your relationship with your parents. Years of therapy, of drug use and promiscuity. Of now being married and the mom of 2 children living in the suburbs, all while navigating a career in sales and then freelance writing and magazine editing and now publishing. I appreciate your willingness to talk about it. Are you ready?
I think so.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Burke, Virginia, which is just right outside of Washington, D.C.
What was Burke, Virginia like?
It's a small-ish town in a major metropolis. There's a sense that everybody knows everybody, but everybody kind of minded their own business too, which is kind of a value of DC life. But I mean, it was a good place to grow up. It was very diverse, very, very diverse, both in terms of race and culture, but also socioeconomic background. So I feel like I grew up with a full view of the world.
Tell me about your mom and dad.
So I have a Jewish mother and an Italian Catholic father, which is can be a blessing and a curse. A lot of intensity, I'll say, comes from that background. I was adopted when I was 3 months old. My parents had tried for years and years to have a baby unsuccessfully. And so they were very, very eager to receive me.
Your dad was a DEA administrator.
He was.
How did that inform his view of the world?
My dad has very strong feelings about kind of law and order. We have very differing opinions about some things, but he also has an incredible respect for law enforcement and for people who serve their country in some ways. I mean, my dad was the person who got the call if a DEA agent was killed, and he was the one who had to inform families. So I remember one particular Thanksgiving where we got 2 calls that night, like in the middle of dinner, that, 2 people had been killed, and he has to go and then relay that information to their families. So I think he, in a sense, has a little bit of a bubble himself about that, and not seeing past what maybe is going on in the drug dealer community or the life of a drug dealer and how they possibly got there and how maybe it wasn't even their choosing or there was no other way. So.
And your mom was a school teacher?
Yes. We lived in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is one of the best school systems in the country. And she chose to go to neighboring county and teach in a Title I school. And that was probably some of my first glimpses into a life that was different than the one I was being raised in, and also how to be of service and take care of other people's.
You mentioned that your parents were eager to receive you.
Mm-hmm.
You've written that you felt smothered and pressured, and you began to rebel.
Yes. I mean, to be received into a family who has been just aching for children, that's kind of a big burden to walk into, because there's a lot of expectation put on you and what you're going to do for them. And I think everybody wants to have children, but when the reason is to kind of fill something in you that's missing, that is a big burden to put on a kid. And their whole life was me. And that was wonderful when I was 6 and wanted their undivided attention and play games. But as I got older and had that natural move towards a little bit more independence, that was met with just kind of gripping control, we butted heads in a big way. So,
how early did you know that you were adopted?
Oh, my mom says that we were watching a show or something, and the woman was pregnant when I was 2 or 3 years old. And I said, "Oh, did I come from your tummy?" And that they told me then that I hadn't. And she said that they kind of reminded me throughout the years. So they were always very, very upfront about it.
Was your rebellion in any way tied to the fact that they weren't your biological parents?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I always had kind of feelings of like longing, but more longing for, I guess, answers. I mean, I went through a good portion of my young kid life convinced Madonna was my mom. So I always had this kind of longing, but I never had a feeling of like, oh, you're not my real parents. And so that was not my pushback. My pushback was just that, like, I wanted some air. Like, I needed to breathe.
How did that pushback show up? How would you describe yourself in your early teens?
Yikes. Horribly disrespectful, very intolerant, very... I mean, in some ways, I imagine a lot like almost all teenage girls. Everything that was said to me was stupid and ridiculous and met with an eye roll and a sigh. But it was, I guess, kind of probably punctuated by the fact that my parents were they could not let go of the little girl that I had been, and that kind of bond we had as like a family. And they met my resistance with more persistence on top of me. So it was ugly. And of course I did things and chose people and friends and boys that probably, I don't remember having conscious thought of this at the time, but I definitely chose people that were going to irritate them. So go figure.
Amanda, when you were 14, something happened to you. What happened?
So I had a quote unquote boyfriend at the time. I mean, you're 14. How much of a mate can you have? But he was someone that my parents hated and that I was not permitted to be anywhere near, never mind speak to him. And so I snuck out of the house to see him, and he had older friends that he hung out with that could drive and could buy alcohol. And that night, this one particular night that I snuck out to meet him, I lost my virginity to him, and the older men that we were with, did not see that as fair, and they both raped me afterwards. And he kind of stood by and let it happen.
So on the day that you lost your virginity as a 14-year-old, 2 other older men raped you?
Yes. Yep.
And your boyfriend watched?
He didn't watch, but he allowed it. Not that he could have done anything, but he didn't even put up a fight in any way. This all took place in the back of a car. The first guy actually afterwards started crying and said, "I can't believe I just did that." But the second guy had no feeling whatsoever and was actually fairly violent and both kind of emotionally and physically torturous in the course of that 20 minutes or so.
What was that night like for you?
Afterwards, I remember them driving me home, and I had buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and was crying, and he was whispering to me that he was so sorry. But the minute I got out of that car and started to walk back through the woods to my house, I just kind of like went numb. Almost like, I guess, like in a protective way for myself. I walked into the house, went to bed, and woke up the next morning and went to school like nothing had happened. And then when I saw 2 of my girlfriends, I ended up confessing what had happened. And they then went to a counselor at school and told them, and they kept me in a little room, and it was crazy because there was probably 4 or 5 school counselors in this middle school, and they all got together, and I had like a substitute teacher like monitoring me, making sure I didn't leave. And they called my parents. My parents came up there, and everybody sat there and kind of told my parents what happened, and then they brought me in the room. And I just remember that, like, walking in there feeling like, oh God, like now I have to take on their devastation about this. Like, it was like another burden. Like, that was more difficult for me than just sitting with it myself. It was because I felt like I had to then manage them. And from there, they took me to the hospital. And a detective met us there, and I just denied the whole thing. Said my friends were making something up, and I was scared about what might happen to me. I was scared that my boyfriend would be mad at me. And, the detective pushed me and tried to make me contradict myself, and I was not budging. And he kind of left in frustration, and my parents then took me from the hospital to what was, I guess, a psychiatric hospital for kids, and checked me in. And basically felt like that was the best course of action because they didn't know how to keep me safe. And I just remember wanting to go home and get into my own bed. But I stayed there for about a month and was put on all kinds of medication, I guess, as a means to cope. I don't know.
That incident was followed with devastating news in your life.
Yes. So right as I was transitioning to an outpatient treatment at that hospital, I got a phone call, and my best friend had died. This was probably 3 weeks after I had been raped, and she had snuck out of the house, kind of similar to me, but with other friends who were not, experienced drivers, and they got in a car accident, and she passed away. And she'd been my best friend since the first grade. I mean, we vacationed together, and with our families were she was like my sister. So it was, after that, it was forget about it. What's the point?
So between the rape and the death of your best friend, you went into a spiral.
I did. It was, and it's tough to know how much of that and the feelings I had after that were kind of the organic feelings that happened after trauma. I had also been put on a bunch of psychiatric medications that we now know make teenagers who take them have suicidal thoughts. So I don't know if I was really suicidal at that time, or if it was the medication. It's kind of like I've said before, it's like you get poison ivy, and then you're told the stuff that you use to treat the poison ivy might make you itch. It's like, okay, well, what is the poison ivy and what's the stuff that's treating it? So I don't know. I don't know what was a real thought or feeling at that time.
You did attempt suicide twice.
I did. Once the first time my dad was on a ton of medication at the time for, blood pressure, heart, diabetes, all that stuff. And I just took fistfuls of that stuff one afternoon and just proceeded to get violently ill. My parents will remember that day as the day I got food poisoning from a bad turkey sandwich. But I just felt like that there was no point at that time. And then the next time I snuck out of the house again, and I stole my parents' car and I drove it into a tree. And it was crazy because I remember pushing the gas, taking it up to 70, and then pulling it into this wooded area where it was a bad street where people had died before, and pulling it in there. And the minute everything crashed and the airbag and everything, the minute it happened, I, started screaming for help. Somebody call my mom and dad, It was like this weird, it was a weird shift all of a sudden. But I was just so kind of dead on the inside and confused, and just, I did not know what I was doing in any way.
One of the things that happened next is it led you to join a group that took control of you for almost the next 8 years of your life. What was that group and what happened?
So I had kind of smoked pot here and there before all that happened, but after that time in my life, it was kind of my go-to relief, which, my parents, my dad doing what he does and whatnot, it was just, they treated it. I mean, you would have thought I was doing heroin the way they reacted to me smoking pot. And so my mom drug tested me every once in a while, and she had drug tested me, and I'd failed. And so they came and picked me up from where I worked at the time and took me back to that psychiatric hospital. And they kind of said, this is a psychiatric hospital, not a place where parents send their children who are smoking weed. But they did have me come to like a day treatment program for a little while. And while I was there was a group that would come in and talk to people about staying clean from drugs and kind of like doing the right thing and staying on the right path. And they seemed like cool people. And I got checked out of that outpatient treatment center on a Friday, and this group was having a camp out about an hour away, and they told my parents that I should go. It was probably at that time maybe 70 or 80 people who ranged from my age to early 20s, and they were sober and did service work and whatnot, and I thought it looked like a great place.
You joined the group at the age of 15.
I did.
And you were part of it until your early 20s.
Till I was 22, yeah, after I graduated college.
And that 7-year period between 15 and 22 became all-consuming. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't any regular Alcoholics Anonymous group, was it?
No, I mean, it was a cult, like, for sure. They had that accusation when I joined, and in recent years, they kind of were given that designation by Newsweek and the Washington Post and other media outlets. But yeah, it was not a good place.
How was it a cult?
It was a cult in that we were brainwashed to believe that we needed them to survive, that we needed the group to survive. And they kind of just preyed on troubled kids whose parents were kind of at a crossroads and at a point where they didn't know what else to do, so they were willing to kind of relinquish. And I mean, the people that I was there with there were a lot of prominent DC families whose kids were there. And it looks from the outside like a Gap commercial, but on the inside it was very different.
It was under the control of a charismatic leader. Mm-hmm. Who was that person, and what was your relationship with him?
His name was Mike. I did not meet him right away. Maybe a week or so into being with them and going to their meetings nightly, that I kind of noticed him because he was stuck out as significantly older than everyone else. He was in his 50s. And I mean, over that 7-year period, our relationship vacillated. I was very close to him in many ways. I mean, but we did, he and I had an interesting relationship in that we kind of got each other in a way and had similar senses of humor, and had we been in a healthy world with healthy age boundaries, like we would have enjoyed spending time with each other. But it was not healthy and did not have healthy boundaries. So,
in fact, you were 15, 16 years old and he was 54.
Yeah.
And you later discovered that he had a pattern of having sexual relationships with teenage girls.
Yes. You know, I knew when I got there, he had a younger, girlfriend. And as I stayed there, they seemed to get younger and younger. But I didn't kind of see behind the curtain for probably like a year and a half or so. And then when he started to pursue me and was using other people in the group to kind of orchestrate me into his bedroom, that I kind of saw what was really happening.
The sexual activity wasn't limited to him and young women. It was actually part of the lifestyle of the group.
It was a place where it was so regular and constant that it did not seem odd for 25, 26, 27, 28-year-old men to have 15-year-old girlfriends, which is what I was. I was, I had a boyfriend who was 28 when I was 15. I had a boyfriend who was 30 when I was 16. I was sleeping with Mike when I was 17. And it didn't seem wrong in terms of our ages, because I didn't know what grooming was. I didn't know what consent in terms of age really was or what it meant. I didn't know any of that.
When you use the word grooming, you're talking about sexual recruiting and manipulation.
Yes, which is, exactly what it was. I mean, the other side of this group was there was a part of it that was very abusive and arduous in terms of the labor that you'd have to do for some of these older people. But when you were the one who was wanted at that time by Mike or by one of the other elders, you were free of that abuse. Like you could sit at the dinner table instead of serving the dinner. You could go on fun trips or just have somebody be nice to you and not be berated, yelled at all the time. So, it was, they say kind of the hallmark of grooming is to make the victim feel as if they're a part of it. And I mean, that's exactly how I felt. Exactly how I felt. I mean, I really did not even realize that what had happened there in terms of the sexual relationship between young girls and older men. I did not even realize that was wrong, like really fully understand that was wrong and damaging to me and my soul until I was probably 25, 26 years old. And I'd been out of there for years.
Who were you during that period of time?
My goodness. Honestly, I was somebody who was just trying to survive. There was definitely fun to be had there. I mean, I got to do things that most people my age didn't do. I went on a lot of trips and, spent the summer like at the beach and with other teenagers and young adults and no parents. But that time, my 15 to 22, that's kind of when you shape and figure out who you are in a sense, and what you like and what your thoughts and feelings are about things. And I was being told what I liked. I was being told what my thoughts and feelings were. I being told what to think about the world and people and situations. And so I was kind of a little bit just like a robot.
The group used a phrase, one clear voice. What does one clear voice mean?
So they would say, you have to have one clear voice. And that was something they started to say as it related to, a lot of these troubled kids coming from, wealthy families. They were seeing psychiatrists or therapists, and they were completely against psychiatry. And there's a lot of principles of the group that were either adopted from or just consistent with Scientology. So the idea was you can't see a therapist, you can't see a psychiatrist, you have to have this one clear voice. And it's got to be, the group's voice or Mike's voice or whatever it was. And I think at some point everybody kind of has that feeling of like, this is wrong, this is not right. And you'd get these questions, do I really need to be here? Isn't there something else? Am I going to be here forever? But we were told like that voice, which is, a gut feeling, but that those were thoughts, and that our thoughts were trying to kill us because we had these diseased brains and we were screwed up. And if we listened to the stuff in our head, that we were in trouble. So they say one clear voice as a means to silence everything else. And that's the thing about cult leaders. I think, I hear things now and again, like as a very removed adult, and they limit your access to information. And when they can't limit your access to information, they discredit those sources of information, or they try to get you to believe that they have another motivation, or there's something behind it, or it's lies. And so I think it's just important that people kind of pay attention to when there's somebody telling you that everything contradictory to what they're saying is wrong. That's a red flag.
How did you find your way out?
I can't really explain what happened. I tried to leave probably a year and a half before I actually did. And I left and I made it like a week. I couldn't, I lost my mind.
You couldn't live in the real world without the group?
Yeah. First of all, my life was totally, like every single person on my phone was somebody in the group. Like I had nobody. And I was just not, I guess, at a desperate enough place where I was willing to literally walk into the world by myself and pick up and start a new life from scratch. And I just thought when I tried to leave, I felt like I was going crazy. And so I went back.
In fact, when you went back, you went all in even more.
Oh yeah, I was, and I was like a celebrated specimen of see what happens when you try to leave. You're always going to find your way back, and there's nothing for you guys out there. But one night, I was with a group of girlfriends, and Mike just laid into me, and that I was, stupid and full of shit and fat, and I had my head up my ass, the stuff that he would always say. And for some reason, like it would like repelled right off of me. I was like, no, actually, that's not true. That's not how it is. And you're just an asshole. Is really how I have no idea how it was that in that moment I was like, no, I'm done here. And I remember my friends, we went outside and they like kind of, came to me, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? Like we kind of, like comforted each other. And I was like, yeah, actually I'm fine. Like I'm good. And it was like, the lights came on in the theater and I could kind of see everything. Yeah, and I think that's just what has to happen for everybody who's in that type of scenario. It's got to come from within.
You began living a very different life. And that life was very much on the edge, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, when I made the decision to leave, I mean, I lived with people in the group, and I think I told my friends like on a Monday in an email. I sent a few of them an email and said, I'm done, like I'm going to move on. And it was instant, like shut out. Nobody responded to an email. Nobody would respond to my calls. And I came home from work on a Wednesday, and there was like 15 people moving my roommates out of the apartment. And I walked in, and my place was empty except for my stuff, and I was alone and had no friends, no nothing. I mean, my parents taught, obviously they were nervous for me because they kind of had bought into it all too. But they were also happy for me because they knew it wasn't like a normal way to live.
But you were suddenly out in the world for the first time in 7 years, learning how to cope with everything new alone.
Yeah. It was definitely the hardest thing I've ever gone through, the leaving part. But I mean, I had to start my life from scratch. And all the while they were still kind of around. Like, I would go to the gym, and like Mike would be there and would like whisper horrible things to me as he walked by. And then like the community as a whole would like see me and see them not speaking to me. And it was kind of like, what's going on here? And so, yeah, it was really, really hard. And I coped with it, I guess, the best way that, a 22-year-old with a decade of insanity behind her out on her own for the first time can do.
You actually became uninhibited in many aspects of your life.
I did. I mean, I felt like I did have this elated sense of freedom. Like, oh my God, I can do anything I want. I can watch anything I want. Like, I can go anywhere and talk to whoever I want. It was crazy. I mean, and so I kind of exploded in a sense. I found the people and the friends that, I mean, I will say the friends that I met after that, they are still some of my best friends today. And just by being my friends saved my life at the time. But, I went out and partied like crazy.
Once you were out of the group and you became this new uninhibited version of yourself, what was happening in your life?
I was probably a little bit like that rebellious teenager, but with a salary in my own apartment and away from my parents. So, I mean, I went out 4 or 5 nights a week, drank a lot. I did drugs. I was also struggling at the time. I mean, I was kind of deprogramming myself a little bit from the group, but, I also was mourning the loss of my family and my close friends of the last 7 years. And so, when I found cocaine, that was the greatest depression alleviator that I had ever come in contact with. And it was something that I probably relied upon a little too much, more than just a party recreation. But I kind of look back at that time, and I was doing whatever I had to survive and find my way in the world.
What were you learning about yourself?
Well, I was learning, like I said, that time in my life that I was in the group, I was given and told and dictated every thought, feeling, belief. And I kind of was learning my own beliefs and figuring out what I really felt about things and what I actually liked and what I really kind of wanted to glean from life. So it was like a total time of discovery and what was important and what wasn't. And I had no, and I don't think that most, I feel like only in recent years, do I really know who I am? I mean, I think that's something that comes, but I think most 22, 23, 24-year-olds probably had a better sense of self, but that sense of self is evolving for most people at that time. Mine was like just starting. Yeah, it was a fun and very scary time.
There came a time when you left Virginia and you found your way to Charlotte. How did that come about?
I had started dating somebody long distance who worked for the same company that I did, and he hated DC, and I wasn't moving in upstate New York, and they had an office in Charlotte that they needed people, and so we said, okay, let's go. That was 2006, and I kind of was ready to leave DC. The group kind of still lingered, and they were still kind of all around, and I just didn't want to be there anymore. And so I was probably more eager to say yes to this boyfriend and this move than I would have been at any other time. And we came down here and figured out the landscape.
Charlotte allowed you to be new again, a new person.
It gave me a clean slate and one free of both physical surroundings and just my own past and reputation. And yeah, it was a whole new ball game, especially coming from a place like DC to a place like Charlotte in 2006, which was very different than it is now.
You're new in Charlotte. You have a blank slate. Who did you want to be?
I'm not sure if I knew who I wanted to be. I knew I wanted a peaceful life. I was not ready to settle down, have children, but I wanted to be living a life where I could welcome those things into my life eventually. And that was not the way I was living prior to moving here. So I'm not sure I knew who I wanted to be. I just knew what I didn't want anymore.
You began to write. That was self-discovery for you, wasn't it?
I started writing because I was desperate to figure out how it was that I had gotten into or situations I had been in. And for some reason, that was the path for me. Is I could not see it. I could not understand it. And because I couldn't see or understand, I also didn't trust myself. And I definitely hadn't forgiven myself. So that was the way to that.
In October 2009, you wrote a piece for the Washingtonian magazine entitled, "How Could He Just Stand There?" What was that piece about?
So I had joined Facebook and found my 14-year-old former boyfriend there. And we started talking. We were talking over Facebook, and then we ended up speaking on the phone, and we talked for a couple hours before I guess, pointed to the elephant in the room and said, "You remember that night?" "Yes." "Well, why didn't you help me?" And it kind of just ended up having a pretty heavy discussion about that. And I kind of had expected him to brush it off or deny it entirely or even hang up on me. And he flat out said, "I failed you. I've never forgotten about that. It's the worst thing I've ever done. I should have helped you." And that he was sorry and that it was awful. And I, it was a validation, I guess, that was very helpful and healing to me.
And you wrote about forgiving him.
I did.
And how did writing that piece and forgiving him publicly help you move on?
It was just kind of, it was a sense of completion. it was like I just had a sense of like, okay, that's done. We're done. And I hope that he had that same experience too.
You entitled your own memoir, One Clear Voice.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose that title?
Well, it was, a repeated theme in the group, but ultimately, and what I learned through getting it all out was like the one clear voice that mattered was my gut. It was my own. And it was the one that people had tried to silence and get me to ignore and to get me to distrust for so long. But it was the only one that mattered.
Are you living now consistent with your one clear voice?
Yes.
Amanda, you're married to a wealth advisor and the mom of 2 children living in Ballantyne and publishing a catalog about society life.
Yes.
Who would have thought? I
did. I mean, this is like the vision I had for my life one day. From the outside, I mean, I think, anybody who listens to this is going to be like, oh my God. And to be honest with you, the only person who could listen to this and not hear anything new would probably be my husband. I mean, I don't think anybody else knows all of this. Some people know pieces, but yeah, my life looks from the outside very, very different than it has in the past.
How are you doing?
I'm happy and content. I feel incredibly, incredibly blessed that I have found something that I feel allows me to be of service in the community, and that is a something that gives me purpose, that hasn't taken me away from raising my kids. And the fact that I get to do both, and the fact that, my husband takes care of us it's a huge blessing.
Amanda, if you were to talk to your 14-year-old self, what would you say to her?
I would say, go to sleep for the next 10 years. I'll come wake you up. I'll come wake you up when it's over. But no, I think I would have said, your gut is not going to steer you wrong. Listen to it. And don't let anybody ever make you question what it's trying to tell you. And that's what I'll tell my kids too.
Thanks for your time today, Amanda.
Thank you.
Amanda Pagliarini Howard is co-founder of the Society Guide. She earned an MFA in creative nonfiction writing from Queen's University of Charlotte and a BA in communications from George Mason University. And now, a personal word. This was a brave conversation for Amanda to have, and I'm grateful to her for sharing it. I met Amanda many years ago and was aware of her story. We recently reconnected after being out of touch. The life she is living now as a wife and mom is different than the one she was living when she and I first met. I asked her if she would be open to telling the story I knew on this podcast. She said yes. Amanda and I met shortly after she arrived in Charlotte. I was the publisher of Charlotte Viewpoint. Amanda was a freelance writer. I'm not sure how we were introduced. I do remember a few long conversations that we had. Amanda wrote the first of several columns for Charlotte Viewpoint in March 2009. Her column was entitled Release from Fear, connecting the sniper shootings that took place in Washington, D.C. with the Great Recession that had taken hold of Charlotte. We were always excited to showcase new writers at Charlotte Viewpoint, and Amanda brought a fresh, new, insightful voice. But in talking with Amanda personally, what became clear in retrospect was that the title of her first column, Release from Fear, might as well have been the title of her move to Charlotte and her beginning a new life. Amanda had a certain toughness about her, a certain experience below the surface. I sensed that she had encountered a range of personalities, had learned to read people to survive, and she was both older and younger than she appeared. I also sensed that she was someone breathing for the first time, calming down from emotional adventures, ready to explore her writing to come to terms with the life she had led and wanted to live. She was starting again. She shared with me a memoir she was writing called One Clear Voice. Only a few people knew what was in her memoir, and she trusted me to read it. In page after page, she detailed being raped, the death of her best friend, her suicide attempts, and being part of a cult-like group that took hold of her life for 7 years. She wrote about her life after leaving the group, her relationships and affairs and drug use, crossing boundaries that had long been transgressed. She was unrelenting in detail, writing down scene after scene, taking herself apart to piece herself back together. I was gripped by her writing and by her self-examination. Every page was an act of catharsis and self-creation. In turn, I shared with her a manuscript I had written. 25 years ago, just after I had graduated law school, I wrote the first draft of a novel. I wrote the novel after a particularly all-consuming and defining relationship had come to an end. The writing was an act of therapy for me as I worked out tensions and impulses in characters that were wrestling with right and wrong in their lives, friendships, marriages, and careers. Writing the novel was a turning point for me. Amanda and I shared our work as writers, and I carry the memory of that exchange with me. Around 2010, Amanda and I fell out of touch. I saw on Facebook that she got married. She became editor of Focus magazine. She had a daughter and then a son. She became editor of Society Charlotte before launching the Society Guide. In the last few months, I saw that Amanda had liked episodes of this podcast on LinkedIn. I reached out to her, and here we are. The Amanda I know is the writer who was staring down truth, who was excavating all parts of her soul, who was rebuilding boundaries that had been shattered, who was doing the work that artists and poets and writers do. Each of us have our secrets and demons. We can see in Amanda freedom from her share. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.